Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. And go and spoil yourself, get yourself a sparkling glass of champagne or something very effervescent and refreshing to drink. Or if you prefer something a little bit warming, go and get yourself a lovely hot cup of cocoa, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. After the birth of my baby Harry, my mother-in-law Maggie was doggedly determined that I was not going to return to work, like she had done when my husband Ian had been born. Maggie was an effusive, gregarious character who'd been deeply entrenched in the fashion industry. She had jet-setted around the globe with her fabulous designer creations. She would watch top models modelling some of her upmarket exclusive designer ranges that had been particularly popular in Milan and Paris. She would also frequent London Fashion Week, Milan Fashion Week, and New York Fashion Week. Maggie had been incredibly passionate about fashion. Leaving her son Ian in the charge of a nanny was the biggest compunction in her entire life. Maggie is sitting with me in my baby's nursery. Although she's no longer in the fashion industry, the residue of her career can be clearly seen, not only in her elegant, flamboyant, rather chic deportment, but by everything she wears, and more to the point, how she actually wears it. My mother-in-law can make a dowdy pair of jeans look like $1 million, with the use of jackets, scarves, costume jewellery and belts. Today she is wearing a classic Chanel navy blue dress, with a string of pearls, staring adoringly at her grandchild's cot. She looks every part the most adoring grandmother, completely obsessed, enchanted and besotted by her grandson. "Doesn't he look just like Ian?" she says proudly. "You think so?" I ask. I can't help thinking at this age my baby doesn't look like anyone particular. Maggie looks at me with a wholehearted, resolute expression upon her face. She clasps her hands tightly together in a prayer-like position. "Please, please, Victoria dear, don't you dare ever go back to work. Well, not at the moment anyway. I beg you. If there's any self-reproach or contrition I have in my life, it's going straight back to work in the fashion industry when Ian was born. I missed out on so much. I've always regretted it with a wistful, nostalgic longing, as if I could go back in time. By golly, I would do things differently." "Maggie, you had a phenomenal career in the fashion industry. Oh, come on, you don't regret that, surely. Think about all the exemplary designer creations that were setting the catwalks alight with your bedazzling designs. That's art. How could you ever be remorseful about that?" "Actually, I am, dear. Very much, if you must know. I'll tell you what's good about being in my 60s. I've actually grown up. I ruefully regret that it took me so long to get my head together. I must say I like myself much more as an older person now. The problem is, when I was so young, I was so naive, immature, driven, impetuous, flighty, impulsively ambitious. Let's just say I think that those are the unfortunate adjectives that best describe me. I placed so little significance on what actually mattered. But when you get to my ripe, wizened old age, you begin to learn that the only things of any real consequence and of momentous noteworthiness are those you love, your friends, your family. When you're younger, your priorities are warped. When I was 25, I was shooting for the stars. I was so self-absorbed. Are you saying if you could do things differently, you would? Oh, definitely. I regret not being there when my son said his first word, when he took his first steps. That time in a baby's life goes by far too fast. And not to be part of your child's metamorphosis, I think, is such a dreadful pity. If you ask any mother, they will tell you that where did the time go to when my child was a baby, as it went so fast. "But I really want to go back to my job," I exclaimed. "Well, I'm sure you can make a plan, dear. Later on, though. Work part-time, perhaps. But not at this critical time in your son's life. I really believe he needs his mother. I promise you that you'll be so glad you took my sagacious advice. I'm not just a pretty face, you know. One day you'll be thanking me You'll be glad you were there when your son had his first birthday, rather than cleaning someone's bedpan in a hospital. Think about it. What is more efficaciously profitable to you emotionally? Well, when you put it like that, I think being at my son's first birthday trumps cleaning someone's bedpan any time of the week. Exactly, my dear. Finally she gets it, says Maggie, looking at me, as if the weight of the world has been lifted off her shoulders. My baby begins to cry. Maggie lifts him out of his cot very tenderly, putting my 2-month-old son onto her knee. She begins to rock him gently in her arms. There, little one, she says, kissing Zack on the forehead. Zack immediately begins to calm down. He gurgles jubilantly. A little smile is on his bonny face as he stares up at Maggie with bright big blue eyes. He regurgitates some of my milk all over Maggie's perfect blue Chanel dress, but she doesn't even bat an eyelid. It's rather amusing to see my stylish-looking mother-in-law covered with my baby's vomit, as there would have been a time when she would have been repulsed by her dress being soiled like this, but not any more. I pass her a damp piece of kitchen towel. Once she replaces Zack in his cot, she wipes her dress down with a huge grin on her face. Oh, babies, she laughs. They do make such a mess. I must admit, in her company, I do feel rather dowdy. I've never been very fashionable myself. I tend to dress for comfort, but Maggie seems to like the fact that I'm prudently down to earth, so that's a very good thing. As acrimonious as she was so good with my son. Ian loved her to death. I was gutted when his first words were Nana, and not Mama or Dada. Well, it's hardly surprising, I say. I mean, his nanny was around him all the time. You and your husband were working full-time. Well, that's my point, dear. Someone else was looking after my baby. Ian was bonding with a stranger. Sometimes when I would pick him up in my arms, he would start screaming and having a tantrum. Then Nanny Curtis would take him away from me and put him in her arms, and she would calm him down at once. It made me feel like my baby wasn't even my own. I mean, I should have been the one calming my baby down, certainly not Nanny Curtis. I used to feel surplus to requirements, almost as if my baby didn't even belong to me. It's rather like owning a beautiful dress that you lend to somebody else, and you're consumed with the green-eyed monster, as you want to be wearing that dress yourself. You're wondering why you ever lent it to a perfect stranger or even a friend. You rarely regret it. And by the way, while we're on the subject of nannies, dear, you absolutely need to get help with baby Zack, as looking after a baby is exhausting, very draining, a plethora of work. You want to thoroughly enjoy every minute of being a mother. You could get yourself an au pair or a nanny to help you share the responsibility, so you can still function efficiently, with someone helping you around the house. It'll mean you can shoot off to town, enjoy a coffee and adult company with your friends. It's imperative for you to have some quality time to yourself, or you might begin to start resenting your own baby, and you certainly don't want that to happen with precious little Zack. When Maggie had left, I reflected on her shrewd, judicious words. I always think young people should listen to older people, perspicacious advice. You can learn from their mistakes. I was amazed that Maggie so wished she had spent more time with her baby, rather than showing off her dazzling creations down some of the illustrious catwalks in both Paris and Milan. That was sententiously eye-opening and evocatively redolent to me. It would make perfect sense to me, as a child is a baby for such a short period of time, and missing out on your baby growing up seems like an awful pity. I do know that mothers get exhausted and completely overwhelmed. All parents need a break from their children to enjoy some adult company. I decided my mother-in-law was absolutely right. So began my search for a nanny for little Zack. I would pay them to help me around the house and to babysit Zack when I went out. Of course, I had heard shuddersome stories about people who had hired insouciant and apathetically negligent nannies, with disastrous repercussions. Ostensibly for me, bringing someone you didn't know to live with us under my roof was rather scary. I knew I'd have to take the interview business rather seriously. It seemed that everyone that came to my door for an interview was not suitable. I needed to feel a compatible rapport with the nanny, if she was going to live with me under my roof with me and my husband, becoming a harmonious member of our family. I think the agency I was dealing with thought I was over-particular, far too fussy. But Mrs. Rockingham, they'd say to me, I assure you that Nicole is an excellent nanny. She comes with brilliant references. I don't care how good her references are, I would say. I've got to live with this girl under my roof. And if I don't like her, and there's no mutual conviviality between us, this arrangement will never ever work. I could almost hear them sighing on the other end of the phone in exasperation, as if I was being unreasonably difficult and asking for way too much. I'm almost certain they'd say to their colleagues, "It's that punctilious taxing woman again, Mrs. Rockingham. It seems there's no pleasing some people. The woman is so ponderously demanding." I don't care how much I frustrated them, as my standards were high. I was being very particular about the type of person I was looking for. I'm sorry I wasn't simply prepared to settle for the status quo. I didn't want to be one of those people who went through a plethora of nannies like a bag of burritos or a box of chocolate candies. In truth, I just didn't warm to any of the nannies I met, for there was always something bothersome about them that niggled me. I'm a great believer in trusting your instincts. I met young, giggly, bemused, inattentive girls who seemed that they were easily distracted by their boyfriends calling them on their cell phones, so they might not concentrate on little Zack, who was my greatest priority. Many of these young women may have been as frivolous as Maggie when she was their age. Then there was the condescending type that I would dread having in my house. They'd probably make me feel like an atrocious mother and be quick to point out all my grievous mistakes. I could see by their surly, humorless faces that having them in my house would be as much fun as living with Scrooge from the Christmas Carol, a pretty miserable experience. Luckily in the end it was my mother-in-law Maggie who came through for me. She said she knew of an excellent nanny from Norway who had American ancestry on her father's side. It appears her dad was born in North Carolina. I was to learn that this lovely young lady was hoping to live in America one day and would love to have a live-in job as a nanny in order to decide whether in the long term she would consider emigrating here. She was such a nice, down-to-earth girl. Her name was Lila Stratton. I think you're going to like her. She's got a quirky personality, a dry sense of humour. I think the two of you will hit it off right away. I happen to think she's a keeper. So Lila Stratton moved into our farmhouse that is situated outside of Portland, northeast from Salem, and close to the Silver Falls State Park, where our family lives, in a colonial revival 2-story white farmhouse with a grey slate roof, black shutters, and a pedimented doorway with porch. From the moment I met Layla, we clicked and had a mutual affection for each other. Truly, I don't know how I would have managed without her. It was great to have her convivial company when I felt like having a glass of wine from the Willamite Valley with an adult. She was indispensable in every regard to me, especially when my son suffered from terrible colic. Layla was delighted to move into my farmhouse. She loved the countryside, was a keen rider, so the two of us would sometimes go riding together on some of the riding trails close to the house when my husband would watch over little Zack for us. Layla described herself as the quintessential country girl, who actually could never envisage herself living in a city. She loved the fact that we had chickens ambling around our farmhouse, horses frolicking happily in the meadows, and that we had a stable block, a barn, an orchard, a large pond, and a wood grove. One day when I returned to my farmhouse, having had coffee with friends in town, I popped to the store to buy a few groceries and returned home with a brown bag in my hand, putting it onto the kitchen counter, along with my purse and car keys. I entered the kitchen. Everything seemed airily quiet. All I could hear was the ominous ticking of the kitchen clock that seemed unusually loud. "Layla! Layla, I'm back!" But there was no response. I was bewildered to see that the back kitchen door had been left wide open, which was exceedingly unusual. I closed it, thinking that Layla must have accidentally left it open. I glanced briefly out of the window. I could see 3 of our horses romping happily in the field. "Layla, are you there?" I called. "I'm back." But there was no answer. I quickly darted up the sweeping, ornate oakwood staircase, calling Layla's name again. "Layla! Layla, where are you? Layla! Layla!" But there was absolutely no response. It was very weird. Where the heck was she? I dashed into my son's pale yellow nursery and was relieved to see Zack lying fast asleep in his cot. But Layla, she was nowhere to be found. Stranger still was the baby monitor wasn't connected. That was exceedingly unusual. Layla always put the baby monitor on. She would never leave Zack unattended, but then where on earth was she? I began calling Lila's name, frantically searching every room in the house. I entered her bedroom. Her bed, as usual, was meticulously made. Her clothes were neatly lined up in the closet. Her purse, cell phone and car keys were sitting on the dressing table. So Lila hadn't even gone out. But where was she? I darted out of the house, wondering if Lila had gone out for a breath of fresh air. I searched the stable block extensively, the barn, the meadows, but Lila was nowhere to be found. Now I was getting unduly concerned. I could feel a bitter nausea rising up in the back of my throat. Something wasn't right. Even my stomach was churning violently, while my heartbeat had increased significantly, as it drummed loudly in my chest. Don't panic, I told myself. Calm down. Maybe she went for a walk in the woodgrove. That was it, I told myself. Of course, she went for a walk in the woods. She never abandoned Zack before, but then, of course, there was a first time for everything. I began to hastily run into the woods. It was a magnificently beautiful morning. The woodgrove twinkled in the morning light. The tall, big leaf maples, the white oaks and ponderosa pines, all well advanced in maturity, rose up into the sky like masterful, viridescent skyscrapers. I'd always appreciated the oak trees in our woods, as they are fabulously big, impressively imposing, with wide outstretched arms that effusively welcome me, always like reliable friends that you can trust. The atmosphere in the wood this morning was so congenial, tranquil and very uplifting. So much so that for a brief moment I almost forgot my angst. Well, almost. I was transfixed by this mesmerizing space. For me, this woodland sanctuary always uplifted my spirits. The canopy above my head sprinkled its sparkling gossamer light onto the dark, fertile earthen floor, peppering it in different light shades. The verdant feathery ferns, variegated ground covers, Spanish mosses swept across the ground in a rich green, resplendent, textured carpet. It was so magnificent to behold. I could hear the sweet trills and tweets of the birds filtering through the pleasing sanctuary, and then I froze when I discovered Lila's yellow flowery scarf, entangled in a bramble bush, caught up in the thorny briars. Now I was grievously concerned. It certainly meant that Lila had been in the woods. I called out her name, running up and down the undulating trails, but there was no answer. I was now really rather frightened. I had to return to the farmhouse, but I wasn't certain what I should do. Did I call the police, or was I overreacting? I mean, maybe she would be coming back in any moment. I decided to give Lila an extra hour. That's what I would do. And if she hadn't returned, I would then definitely call the police. I quickly made myself a cup of coffee to calm my frazzled nerves, and I looked in on my baby Zack. Where was Lila? Where was she? An hour later I'd phoned up the police. I did feel a level of reassurance when the police vehicle drove up my drive. Its wheels crunched the pebbles beneath hardy rubber tires. 2 officers climbed out of the vehicle. I heard the knocker being rapped. I quickly answered the door, dutifully guiding both the officers into my living room. I'm Officer Jones. This is Officer Miller. How can we be of help to you? Please take a seat, I said, pointing to the upholstered chairs in my living room. Both men sat side by side on the settee, looking authoritative and businesslike, which brought me a measure of reassurance. These astute, sharp-witted men would find Lila. I was sure of it. Officer Jones looked like the more senior detective. He appeared to be in his 60s, while the other officer looked considerably younger, as if he was in his 30s. Officer Jones brought out a notepad from his pocket. He studied me intently, through shrewd, assertive brown eyes. So you say that your nanny has gone missing? That's right, I said. Look, I don't know if I'm overreacting, officers. All I know is she should be back at the moment, but it's not like her to go off like this. She's been working for me for over a year now. I know her very well. I find her to be considerably reliable. Also, her SUV is parked in our driveway. I checked her bedroom. Her car keys, cell phone and wallet are both on her dressing table. Now, she'd never leave without them, so this is exceedingly odd. I don't understand where she could have got to. I agree. It is very peculiar, said Officer Miller, rubbing a finger across his cleanly shaven chin. So you believe her going off like this is enigmatic behaviour? Most definitely, officers. This is incongruous behaviour for her at the best of times. I searched for her absolutely everywhere. I did find her yellow scarf caught up in the briars in the woodgrove. Both of the officers exchanged concerned looks between each other. "We'll be needing that scarf for DNA analysis," he said. "Now, could you tell me what Lila looks like?" "Well, she's half Norwegian, half American. Her dad's actually from North Carolina. She's quite tall, about 5'7", 5'8", I think. Slender with long blonde hair that's very straight and shiny, with bangs. She has fair skin, blue eyes. She's pretty." "Do you know what she was wearing today?" I tried to rack my brains. What was she wearing? "I'm sorry, Detective," I said, waving my hand. "I'm just trying to think for a moment. She's a quirky bohemian dresser. Let's see. Yes, she was wearing white pants this morning, a long mustard jersey jacket sweater. It trailed beyond her knees. The yellow scarf as well, but as you know, that got caught up in the briars. I think she was also wearing a white blouse with a thin gold belt. That's right, she was wearing a gold belt." Officer Miller scribbled all the details down attentively. "Do you have a photograph of your nanny on hand?" Yes, I do. Hold on a second. I won't be a minute," I said, dashing to the kitchen area of our open-plan living room cum kitchen. I quickly opened my purse, pulling out my cell phone. Briefly clicking onto the photograph section, I paused for a moment to make a decision. This is a good one, I think. "I have a photograph here," I say to the officers. They both take a snap of my picture on their cell phones. "Was there anything uncustomary, ma'am, when you came back from coffee with your friends this morning?" "Yes, actually there was. I noticed the baby monitor was off, which is exceedingly unusual. You see, this is a big farmhouse, so we leave the monitor on at all times. Oh yes, and the back kitchen door was left wide open. It's never left open like that," which was decidedly odd and atypical. This time it was the young Officer Miller who asked me a question. "Ma'am, if I may trouble you for a moment, I'd like to ask you about your nanny's demeanour of late. She hasn't been depressed recently, or troubled in any way. You haven't seen any changes in her personality?" "No, she's always easygoing, fun-loving, happy, cracking jokes. This morning was no different to that." "So what was the last thing she was doing this morning? Can you remember?" "Well, she was eating a cream cheese bagel. She was drinking coffee at about 8 o'clock in the morning." "Do you mind, ma'am, if we take a quick look around the place? We'll also need a DNA sample from her hairbrush. Is that all right with you?" Officer Miller was on his cell phone, asking for a couple of people to bring over some sniffer dogs to the house. "I'm surprised," I said. "I thought you needed 72 hours before you search for a missing person." "Depends on the case, really. This one is idiosyncratic and rather unorthodox. And given you found that scarf on some thorny briars, we need to search the woodgrove to see if the sniffer dogs pick up a scent. We'll also be checking your pond, obviously." The police arrived on the scene. They began to thoroughly search for Lila everywhere, but there appeared to be no sight or sound of her. "Did the dogs pick up anything?" I asked. "Yes, they picked up her trail in the woods, but then it comes to a very mysterious, rather ambiguous, paradoxical, almost abrupt end. Very bizarre indeed. But for a moment we've done all we can do. But we will certainly keep you posted at all times. It will seem that your nanny did go into the woods, but the scent trail just stops. Very curious indeed." "So you think she definitely went into the woods then?" "It would seem so." For the next couple of days the police continued to search for Lila, without much luck. She had been registered as a missing person. Her DNA had also been put on record. It would seem like many of those 411 cases you hear about, Lila had elliptically disappeared into thin air, and both my husband and my mother-in-law were exceedingly troubled about Lila's welfare, for none of us could comprehend what had happened to her. "This is very peculiar, darling," Maddie said to me. "It strikes me as exceedingly odd that Lila goes into the woodgrove, the sniffer dogs lose her scent near an oak tree. I mean, how on earth does that ever happen?" "I don't know," I said. "I agree with you. It is idiosyncratic behaviour for Lila. She was such an authentic, dependable nanny. I don't honestly know what's going on." Well, I spoke to Officer Jones. It seems he can't get hold of the Strattons. That's Layla's parents. I gather they're celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary. The husband took his wife somewhere remote, very obscure, so they can't contact them. But maybe in the circumstances it's a good thing, because I really believe we're going to find her. I'm sure we are. You do? I asked. Well, I do, as it happens. I'm quite intuitive. I really believe she's still alive. Well, Officer Jones thinks something nefarious could have happened to her. He says it's a possibility. He believes she might have been running from someone because of her scarf being caught up in those briars. He thinks they could have kidnapped or abducted her. He said that's a distinct possibility. Of course, we do have to consider that, says Maddie. He's right about that. Anything could have happened to her. But let's not jump to conclusions until we have some proper answers. And let's keep our fingers crossed that Layla will turn up as right as rain. It was on the 4th night that I suddenly woke with a start, almost certain I'd heard something, but I wasn't quite sure what. I sat up and listened intently. I knew I'd heard something, and then I heard it again. It sounded like someone was banging on the kitchen door very, very loudly. So I immediately bounded down the staircase like a jackrabbit, racing to the door, my heart pounding in my chest violently. Please God, may that be Layla, I was praying inwardly. So imagine my surprise when I was to discover that Layla was indeed at our front door. There were leaves and twigs in her hair. Dirt was strewn all over her face. Her white trousers were badly shredded. She was covered in dirt. Where have you been? I asked, taking Layla into my arms. We've been worried sick about you. What happened to you? Layla's story. I was sitting in the kitchen on a high chair, around the kitchen island, with the white quartz countertops, thoroughly enjoying my cream cheese bagel, served with a piping hot cup of coffee, while I was flicking through the pages of a magazine, reading some of the articles. Bye, Layla. I'm going now, Victoria says to me. I'm just popping into town to have some coffee with friends. How do I look? She says, doing a twirl. You look amazing, Victoria. Victoria never normally wears dresses, but on this specific occasion she was wearing a cream tunic dress with a black belt and black court shoes, and she looked phenomenal. What's the occasion? I asked. Well, it's just one of my friends, you know. She always goes to such effort to look smart, so I decided to make an effort for the occasion. I'm usually just so casual, aren't I? Well, you look $1 million today. When will you be back? I'm not sure. I won't be long. I'll pick up some groceries on the way. Rightio. See you soon. I hear the whooshing sound of Victoria's car wheels driving down the pebbly path, and then a strange noise grabs my attention. It sounds like something with ponderous footsteps is standing outside the kitchen door. This is when I suddenly discern a big black shadowy creature in our backyard. It was looking in at me inquisitively through the kitchen door. I realised to my amazement this is an abominable snowman, or what you call in America a Bigfoot. The creature sees me. I can see he's not pleased to be seen. He quickly scurries away into the woodgrove. When the creature had looked at me, I had discerned his kind eyes that were the colour of treacle. He also had a human face that looked so gentle and benevolent. I wasn't afraid of him at all, despite his gargantuan size. In truth, he had the eyes of a lovable teddy bear that you just wanted to hug. I could see he was 8 foot tall, about 700 pounds, and built like a burly piece of farming machinery. So I ran surreptitiously after him. I was so curious. I never normally would have acted so impulsively like this, but it's not every day you see an abominable snowman. I remember growing up in Norway once. We had to write an essay in school of what kind of fairy tale-like creature we would love to encounter in real life, if only it were real, that is. Many of the kids in my class wrote about unicorns, fairies, gnomes, extraterrestrials, dinosaur, and even the Loch Ness Monster from Scotland. My essay was about the abominable snowman. I had to read my essay to the entire class because it was so good. It was like I'd always had an inner hankering to see one of these creatures, but never for a single moment did I think that they were real. But now I was seeing one. I was not going to miss out on having a closer look at this creature. I might never get a second chance. I clandestinely entered the woodgrove with a cautious approach, but I snagged my scarf on a bunch of briars, but I ignored it, and tiptoed lightly on my feet, behind one tree after another. This outlandish critter has captivated my intrigue, hijacked my attention. Even my responsibilities as a nanny are thrown to the wayside like an abandoned bag of school books. I don't want the Bigfoot to know I'm following it. It seems so shy and evasive. I'm hoping I'll get a better look at him. I hide in the woodgrove, watching this black Bigfoot who's ambling over to this bush of berries. He's eating them, blindly oblivious to the fact that I've actually followed him, and that I'm hiding behind a tree, watching him intently. I am blown away by how magnificent he is. The next thing I know is there's a discomposing growling sound that reverberates throughout the woodgrove, with an ear-piercing vibration that could almost shatter glass. I tremble in terror. Before I see anything, I sense an intimidating, threatening presence that feels bodefully dangerous and very claustrophobic, as if something quite treacherous is drawing close to me. I turn around in abject horror to see this huge auburn-headed Bigfoot standing only a hair's breadth away from me. I had not heard his stealthful approach, but I had sensed it and smelt it. This formidable Bigfoot pulls back his thin lips to expose his huge white, human-like teeth. He's glaring at me with very menacious eyes that give off a malevolent red eye-shine. Everything about this Bigfoot's demeanour is intrinsically evil, full of a tangible hatred, almost as if every cell in his body is screaming, "Killer! Killer!" He is polar opposite to the black Bigfoot in every conceivable way, as dramatic as black is to white, as good is to evil, as an apple is from a pear. I cannot describe the fear that incarcerates every blood cell of my body, completely paralysing my adrenal response, immobilising my knees so that my legs crumble beneath me, like jelly. My heart pounds violently in my chest. I audibly hear every single beat. My mind has become clouded by a foggy, clawing mist, obscuring all my thoughts that whirl around my head like the clothes in a spin-dryer. I have no comprehension how to react to this Bigfoot. I am so gripped by terror that I am rendered completely helpless, so that I almost surrender to its mercy. But he has none. He has me cornered from every side, unable to run away. I can smell his putrid breath misting up my face. I perceive he derives great pleasure from my trepidation, rather like a cat toying with its prey. With one powerful overlong arm he tugs me, grabbing me with one hand, tossing me up in the air as if I'm a ball. For a moment I'm airborne. As my body is launched into the air, it begins to fall. Down, down, down. I'm free-falling, as if I'm on a parachute. I scream at the top of my lungs. I know I'm about to end up pulverised on the forest floor. But the Bigfoot catches me in time. I knew he was toying with me. He tosses me up in the air again, for a second time. I feel almost resigned to my plight, almost as if my life is precariously hanging by a fine thread that will very soon be snapped. I close my eyes tightly to brace for impact. This time I'm caught by the black Bigfoot, who throws me on his back. He runs away with me into the woods. The relief I feel is immense. I know I'm in safe hands. The red-headed Bigfoot is running after us, screaming like a banshee. But for some strange, incongruous reason, he doesn't tackle the black Bigfoot, whom I notice is wearing an interesting leather bracelet upon his wrist. I'm not exactly sure why the red Bigfoot doesn't challenge him, but he certainly looks as mad as hell, and is still following us. Finally, the dark Bigfoot is climbing up the rocky elevation that could not easily be tackled by a human being unless they were using ropes and mountain climbing gear. But this critter jumps up the rocks with a fluid buoyancy, like a cat bouncing gracefully off a kitchen cabinet. He is like an acrobat in his movements. They're so fluid, powerful and agile, even with me slung over his shoulders. Before I know it, I find myself in a sprawling cave, where there's a substantial-sized female Bigfoot, along with her daughter, standing there in the cave, somewhat obscured by the darkness. But I see them more clearly when my eyes begin to adjust to the dimness. I realise it is the older son that rescued me from that rang-a-tang-coloured Bigfoot. When the male Bigfoot sees his mother, he engages in a deep, earnest conversation with her. They're talking together backwards and forwards in a very strange language. Their voices sound solemn and very troubled. The Bigfoot female is looking at me. She nods. I knew she was speaking about me, but I wasn't certain what she was saying. But she's not at all unfriendly. On the contrary, her benevolent eyes twinkle with a warm, generous kindness. The female Bigfoot turns around. She looks at me, through her deep-set dark eyes. I hear her saying in my head, "You'll be safe here. You can only go back home when Bidzell gets back, when he gives you a leather bracelet to wear. Otherwise you won't be safe, as Gwitzi from the Bigalona clan will surely kill you. He's marked you as his own, or he'll keep you as his woman." I nodded in agreement. I could see that this Bigfoot family was so generously kind, and they knew what they were talking about. There's no way I want to be anywhere near that iniquitous red-headed Bigfoot. I glanced briefly around the cave. It's pleasantly cosy and snug, generously lined with deer skins. Deer antlers are hanging on the cave walls, rather like decorations. Surprisingly, it smells like the woods. There are sticks on the floor that are lined up in blocks, covered with moss and deer skins, and when you lay back on the bedding, it's pleasingly comfortable. I glance out of the cave. I knew without the Bigfoot's help, there was no way I'd be able to walk down these rocky outcrops, as they're so sheer. When I glance out of the cave, I can see the red-headed Bigfoot sitting there on one of the rocks further away, with his overlong, powerful legs dangling over a rocky ledge. It's like he's laid claim on me, and is waiting for me to be his. He seems determined to get his trophy. For the next 3 days I see him hanging around on that rocky ledge, patiently waiting and waiting and waiting. I knew there was no way I could leave this cave until Bidzell got back, whom I gather was the head of the Bigfoot family. I am informed that he is the most powerful Bigfoot in these parts, respected by all the different Bigfoot clans. And if he puts a special leather necklace around my wrist, all the Bigfoot clans will know that it's from Bidzell and that I belong to him. He's marked me as his own, so they cannot touch me in any way. He is so highly regarded in these parts. If another Bigfoot clan, for example, kills a deer, and Bidzell puts a leather bracelet on the deer, they have to hand it over to him, as everything he marks with a leather thong belongs to him. The Bigfoot family were very kind to me. I ate roots, berries, apples and nuts with the Bigfoots. They offered me some of their meat. I didn't want to eat anything raw, so the Bigfoot female, understanding my dilemma, made a fire especially for me. She rubbed 2 sticks together so effortlessly, and the fire was made. I could cook my own venison. She told me sometimes they cook their meat, especially in winter when it's cold. They collected water from the stream, using old Coca-Cola bottles that were made from glass. I noticed that there were always bottles available in the cave, full of water, which I would drink. The Bigfoot family taking care of me leave the cave at will to hunt, explore, to play, or forage for food. They all wear a personally designed Bidzell leather bracelet on their wrists, made especially for them, which means that the red-haired Bigfoot or any other Bigfoots can never attack them. Outside the cave entrance is a long leather creation that rather reminds me of a dream catcher. There are eagle feathers attached to it, and it's very attractive. I fancy it for myself, actually. I'd hang it on my bedroom wall. I gather it's known as a natsalid, which means a rainbow seal of protection. What this intrinsically means is that no other Bigfoot can gain entry into the cave, unless they're wearing a Bidzell leather bracelet. I guess the red-headed Bigfoot really didn't think Bidzell would be interested in marking me as his own, but he underestimated the kindness and generous compassion of this Bigfoot family, who have taken me cordially under their wings. I was to learn that there are different clans of Bigfoots, often at loggerheads with each other. There are often fights against rival groups, but no one ever dares take on Bidzell. I asked where he'd gone. They said he was scouting other territory, looking for warmer locations for winter. They often move around, as they're like nomads. The Bigfoot female told me that Bidzell means strong. I gather her name is Lamontsi, which means pretty flower. The son that rescued me was called Kitlali, which means star. The daughter was called Bahita, which means eagle child. The young Bigfoots played games with me on the cave floor. I played with them using a thin stick to hit an acorn. The object was to aim the acorn into a little goalpost that's made out of sticks. The game is called Omonsi, and it was not easy. Naturally, I was worried about returning home, as that ghastly red-headed Bigfoot was hell-bent on claiming me as his own. He was hanging around the area like an obnoxious bad smell. I was thrilled when Bitzel finally returned home, with a massive deer flung over his shoulders. He was enormous, 1,000 pounds easily or more, and 10 foot tall. No one in their right mind would ever challenge a creature as titanic as him. He is Herculean in size, built like an army tank. When he entered the cave, he was rather bewildered to see me sitting there playing with Sitali and Bahita, his 2 beloved children, whom I had grown very fond with over the last 3 days. It's then that Lamotzi, the female Bigfoot, begins to talk to him earnestly, backwards and forwards, in a deep, compelling conversation. I know I'm being discussed at great length. Bitzel is the most lofty, majestic, powerful and awesome Bigfoot. So human-looking, rather reminding me of a noble Indian chief. I could easily envisage him wearing one of those Indian headdresses made of eagle's feathers. He looks at me and says to me telepathically, "You will be safe. I will mark you as my own. No one can claim you." He measures my wrist with his hands, prepares me a leather bracelet, the one I'm wearing now. Bitzel throws me over his shoulders. The other Bigfoot seem so sad to see me go. They pat me on the back. I hear them saying in my head, "We will miss you." Tears spring up in my eyes, for I know I will miss them too. Bitzel carries me down the rock face with such grace. The Auburn Bigfoot's face glances directly at my hands, which I'm waving for him to see. "Look! I've got one of Bitzel's bracelets!" His face becomes downcast when he sees I'm wearing a Bitzel leather bracelet. He ambles away solemnly, knowing that I now belong to Bitzel, and there's nothing he can do about it. I think he's gutted. Bitzel takes me back to the forest and says to me in my head, "Godspeed, my child. May God be with you." I thanked him for what he'd done. He nodded and glided away. So here I am, back to Victoria. As you can imagine, Lila's story intrigued me. I believed every word of it. The leather bracelet she was wearing on her wrist from Bitzel was actually rather attractive. I fancied one for myself. Lila decided to tell the police that she had no memory of what had happened to her in the woods and where she'd been. So for us, life returned to normal again. If I have any advice for mothers embarking on raising a baby, please take my mother-in-law's sagacious advice. Be around for your baby on those first few impressionable years, for they grow up far too fast. You would have missed out on so much. I'm so glad I listened to Maggie. There's no question that she was right about that. But I will say this, if you can afford to get help, it'll be a good idea for you, as being a mother is exhausting work. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.